topic of carer harm. And this is a webinar that's co-hosted by Family Carers Ireland and UCD. So my name is Nikki Dunn. I'm the research manager with Family Carers Ireland. And for those of you that don't know us, we're the national organisation supporting family carers across Ireland. We're a not-for-profit organisation and we support carers and young carers through the provision of a wide suite of support such as counselling, specialised training and education programmes, respite provision, advocacy, peer support and research, of course, as well. So we've worked with Sarah Donnelly over the last 2 years on a piece of research that's been funded by the Irish Research Council New Foundations Grant Scheme. And this is a small research project that has examined the issue of carer harm. That is carers who are experiencing harm in the context of the caring relationship. And Sarah will go on and kind of describe that in more detail. So the research has really shone a light on a very much hidden aspect of the caring experience. And we are very grateful to have worked with Sarah over the last 2 years on this topic. She's brought a huge amount of empathy to such a sensitive topic, and we're really grateful for the carers and other professionals who've taken part in the project as well. And it's really heartening to see so many people here today with an interest in this issue. Now, before I introduce Sarah and get started, I just want to share a couple of housekeeping notes. So we've scheduled 2 hours in for this afternoon. Sarah's going to present for an hour and then give a detailed overview of the Carer Harm project and focus in on some thoughts for policy and practice. We'll allow maybe 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A after that before moving into a panel discussion with 4 speakers who are here today: Susan Crampton, Lourdes Sanchez, Celine O'Connor and myself, and Sarah will chair the second part of the meeting. If you want to ask Q&A, you can submit questions via the Q&A function, or else you can use the hands up function and we can unmute you so you can ask your question live. The chat function is also open if you have any comments or anything that you want to kind of comment on during the webinar this afternoon as well. We're recording Sarah's presentation and we'll upload it to the Family Carers Ireland website afterwards and share a link with attendees. And we're not recording the Q&A and the panelist discussion as well. So it's just the first half of the webinar. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Sarah Donnelly. Sarah is an assistant professor of social work at the School of Social Policy, Social Work and Social Justice at University College Dublin. Sarah is co-convener of the European Network for Gerontological Social Work and academic advisor on adult safeguarding to the Irish Association of Social Workers. And prior to working with UCD, Sarah worked as a medical social worker for 15 years as a social work team leader in the age-related healthcare team in Tala University Hospital. Sarah has published widely on adult safeguarding, ageing, dementia, care planning meetings, capacity and decision-making, and is a passionate advocate for human rights and social justice. So over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nikki, for the lovely introduction. And again, I'd really like to sincerely thank everyone for attending today. It's fantastic to see so much interest and also to our panelists as well, which I'll introduce later. So look, I'm just going to try and share my screen and then we can get started, hopefully. Okay, so, so hopefully everybody can see and hear me okay. Ashley, you can let me know if there's any difficulties there. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Ashley. So as Nikki said, today's presentation is really presenting the findings from the Carer Harm project. And again, really, we wanted to focus today more on the implications for policy and practice responses in the Irish context. And again, I must formally acknowledge the funding from the Irish Research Council, which without that, this project really wouldn't have been possible. So firstly, I think it's important to kind of set the scene and give, for people who aren't familiar with the whole concept of care harm and what that means, a little bit of background information. So really, care harm is when carers experience violence or become subject to controlling or coercive behaviour, either on an incidental or systematic basis, resulting in physical, psychological, and or sexual harm. And again, there hasn't been a huge amount done on this. There's been a little bit done in the UK context around care harm experienced by carers of people living with dementia. And again, I suppose both in the Irish and UK context, some work on child-parent violence or harm, but again, it's been very, very small scale. Again, I suppose what really triggered our interest in this area and why I was so keen to carry out this piece of research. And again, I must kind of acknowledge formally all of the help that Nikki has given in supporting this, but also Family Carers Ireland, because really ultimately this came from a 2019 survey that was carried out by Family Carers Ireland, the College of Psychiatrists of Ireland, and Dr. Deirdre O'Donnell from UCD, which showed that I think it was approximately 44% of carers in that survey had reported experiencing physical, psychological, or emotional harm from the person they were caring for. And again, the study kind of, very much emphasised that while the risk of deterioration in carers' health and well-being as a result of caring has been very well documented in the literature, there's also clear evidence of the significant long-term negative impact on the health of those who experience harm or abuse. But really, we know very little about this, about harm experienced by carers at the hands of the person that they're caring for. And really, we knew kind of anecdotally, but again, we hope the study would help to shed further light on the challenges that are often faced by social workers and other health and social care professionals and organisations when care and harm intersect, and a service user or a child is exhibiting harmful behaviour towards their family care or family members. And there have been kind of calls for all stakeholders to work more proactively with families where care and harm intersect. So that was really kind of our starting point to find out more about this. And again, the 2019 report was very clear in terms of some of its recommendations, in terms of the impact of physical and verbal abuse in family carers really remaining a hidden and under-researched area. And the further research really needs to be done so that we have more awareness of this, but also we can develop more effective interventions to allow family carers to care safely. Okay, so moving into the research design. So I suppose ultimately what we set out to find out, our primary research question was, what are the perceptions and experiences of family carers of care harm by care recipients, and how can they be better supported by professionals? Our first work package or kind of piece of work was secondary data analysis from the 2019 survey, which I'm not reporting on that today. That was really a qualitative analysis of some of the data from that survey, which really, I suppose, largely kind of indicated two primary cohorts who were experiencing care harm from that survey, carers of children or adults with autism and carers of people living with dementia. So again, in conjunction with our steering committee, we really decided that and agreed that this should be the focus or the primary focus of the study. So leading on from that, our second work package involved narrative interviews. So we carried out 5 narrative interviews with family carers of children or adults with autism and interviews with family carers of people living with dementia who have kind of self-identified as experiencing care harm. We also carried out an interview with an autism education provider two autism education providers and a Family Carers Ireland senior manager. In conjunction with that and to complement that data, and really because again, the sample size is obviously quite small and recruitment was quite difficult for a number of reasons. I think firstly, we were working within very tight timescales. It took a lot of time, as you can imagine, to get through ethics, but also because of, I suppose, the very sensitive nature of this topic, people were maybe a little bit reluctant to come forward as well. So we also carried out focus groups with Family Carers Ireland case support managers, one with a kind of variety of autism professionals and one with dementia professionals. And again, all of the findings from this then fed into work package 3, which was what we call a World Cafe co-design workshop, where again, we brought people together, members of the autism community, members of the dementia community to co-design based on those findings, information and awareness raising leaflets. And again, we'll talk about them a little bit more as we move through the presentation. I should have said at the outset, and again, apologies, really the study wouldn't have been possible without the input and the support and involvement of Dr. Marita O'Brien, who was the postdoctoral researcher on this project as well. So I'd just like to formally acknowledge Marita's involvement. So moving into the narrative interview and focus group findings. So really a purposeful sampling approach was employed, where, as I said, narrative interviews were carried out with 5 family carers of autistic children or adults and 4 family carers of people living with dementia, as well as the autism educators and the Family Carers Ireland senior manager. In terms of the focus groups, in all, 14 people participated in 3 focus groups, and this included Family Carers Ireland support managers, a Family Carers Ireland senior manager, a variety of social workers, as you might expect, from TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, Safeguarding and Protection social workers, a disability service provider social worker, medical social worker, but also a dementia nurse specialist, a dementia advisor, an advanced nurse practitioner for dementia, and also an occupational therapist. And again, as I said, each Word Cafe session involved a combination of family carers, social workers, and representatives from NGO and advocacy organisations. So to just dig down a little bit more in terms of the participants in the interviews. So again, we had our 5 family carers, and again, we can see primarily all mothers to either autistic sons, an autistic daughter, and again, we had a range of, and also some adult children and a range of ages. But again, we can see, 3 of the participants had children who were kind of around puberty age or age 12. Again, in terms of the dementia carer cohort, the 3 of the interviewees were daughters of the person living with dementia, and 1 participant was the wife of the carer of the person living with dementia. So I suppose really when we got into analysing the data, some key themes emerged. And again, we've kind of grouped them under 3 major themes with kind of subheadings underneath that. So firstly, the whole, I suppose, concept of how we understand care harm. So firstly, what do we mean by care harm and how do we define it? Secondly, the theme of stigma, shame and guilt. And again, this was kind of one of the most striking and impactful themes that arose in terms of that family caregiver lived experience. Also, obviously, different types of care harm experienced, but also the very strong theme of expectations, responses, and systems that harm within that. The next major theme was that of protecting family carers from care harm. So again, within that diagnosis as a critical juncture, the need for early intervention, the whole issue of transitions and changing care needs. And again, that was different for the 2 cohorts. For our autism family carers, that was really around key transition stages, as I said, such as puberty, whereas for the people living with dementia, it tended to be as the illness progressed and the person living with dementia's care needs changed, the need to kind of respond to that and the challenges that posed. Again, the whole issue of for family carers trying to navigate a fragmented and complex health and social care system. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of not just family carers find difficulties navigating this, but also professionals themselves. And I suppose ultimately professionals reporting on their helplessness and inability to respond. Our final theme really focuses on what helps in these very, very difficult situations. And again, I suppose both myself and Nikki and Family Carers Ireland were really, really keen from the outset that this wouldn't just be a piece of academic research, which of course is important, but we really felt it was critically important that there were tangible outputs that would really help to raise awareness, but also to, I suppose, hopefully better support both family caregivers, but also the professionals and services working with them in trying to navigate this very, very difficult, I suppose, situation. Okay, so moving back to understanding care harm, I think it's fair to say across the board in terms of our family care participants, but also our focus group participants, there was a real difficulty and uncomfortableness with defining and understanding the terminology of care harm. For many participants, it wasn't a term that was instantly recognisable, nor was it kind of deemed to be well understood or regularly used in the everyday language of professionals or by family carers, which I think is very kind of telling in itself. Again, we've now reached the end of the project, and I would still say this is something we are really grappling with in terms of not really, I suppose, coming to a conclusive decision or consensus around what the right, if you want to use that terminology, what the right language is. But look, we'll talk about that a little bit more in the discussion as well. But again, this presentation is very much, I suppose, populated with quotes to really illustrate those themes. So, because again, I think they speak to it more strongly than myself giving a descriptive narrative. So one of our dementia professional focus group participants spoke about, when we think of care harm, again, I struggle with the language. And I was thinking in my own head when you were talking, what other language could you use? I don't know. An autism focus group participant reflected, this is not willful abuse, like it's abuse, but within the context of that person's autism and responsive behaviours. And finally, Family Care Ireland focus group participants spoke about, some people I find would never describe it as care harm. They would never use the word, like I feel. Again, I think professionals struggled with this language more than the family carers themselves, in terms of really just not knowing how to kind of articulate the complexity of many of these situations. For me, one of the most striking and kind of, I suppose, lasting findings was the immense and huge stigma, shame and guilt that many of our family carers expressed around their experiences of harmful behaviour. And again, for many, stigma and shame were identified as significant barriers for family carers in disclosing their experiences of care harm. Family carers very much expressed the guilt they felt talking about this, feelings of being disloyal to the person they cared for, and really very, very uncomfortable around the sensitivities of the harmful behaviour. Again, I think fear for many, what was making this, I suppose, the ability to disclose and share their experiences of care harm and to seek support was fear the consequences of disclosing, fear the consequences of disclosing, and I suppose the unwelcome responses and interventions that might be generated by that for many was a real factor. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but really people feeling that by disclosing it, those unwanted interventions would be kind of forced upon them. So Katrina, who was an autism carer, talked about, carers don't talk about it. I think there's a huge stigma around, there's a huge silence. I mean, I haven't told most people what I told you this morning, do you know? And even when I'm talking to other carers, we don't talk about that, it's taboo. A dementia focus group participant also reflected, I find that when I do have carers wanting to talk to me and share their experience, they're very apologetic, please don't judge me. They feel they expect me to judge them because they're talking about that, despite trying to build this open relationship. So certainly it's almost like it's guilt, so much guilt, that I should not be disloyal to my loved one by discussing this. So again, I think that speaks very, I suppose, very powerfully to those very, very strong emotions that family carers experience around, as I said, sharing their experiences of care harm, but also seeking help and support in relation to it. Again, I think important to acknowledge that for many family carers, it takes time to open up. And again, this is illustrated well by the quote from a dementia focus group participant who reflected, I think definitely yes, stigma. I think in our carers group, I know it takes many weeks for people to finally open up. You can go through communication sessions and go through self-care sessions, and sometimes it can take 6 weeks, and then it comes out. They realize what harm is and what's not acceptable behavior, because I think some people don't know. And again, that also came through very strongly in the findings, in that for many carers, they don't recognize this behavior as harmful, and they very much view it as part of, I suppose, the experience of caring. So again, and not recognizing this behavior as harmful or unacceptable, that need to kind of seek help and support, or that awareness just isn't there. So moving on to the types of harm experienced, and again, unsurprisingly, family carers spoke about experiencing a wide range of types of harm, which included shouting, screaming, damage and destruction of personal possessions or the family home, but also significant levels for some of physical violence, as well as knock-on emotional and psychological distress. Again, in some of these instances, the physical violence the family carers were being subject to was certainly, I would deem, life-threatening in some situations. Again, family carers spoke about the impact on their own health and well-being, as well as the impact on siblings, in particular for the autism carers, and other family members for the dementia carers. Professionals also described the types of harm that they had had interaction with and had been experienced by family carers they work with. And that included physical aggression or assaults, emotional toll, impact on and also the impact on the family carers' mental health. So again, we have some quotes that very much illustrate, I suppose, that lived experience of carer harm. So Jennifer, who's a dementia carer to her mother, talked about, so some nights she's screaming outside my door, she's confused and she gets agitated in the middle of the night. So some nights I could be up all night with her trying to settle her and get her back to bed. And obviously she comes up screaming and that wakes the kids up. So some nights are awful. Some nights are good now and you can get a full night's sleep, but it's like having another child in the house. I have a baby monitor there. You nearly want a camera system in the room to make sure that she doesn't do something that she forgets about. And again, I suppose there's a lot more detail about this in the actual research report. Jennifer talks about the difficulties of balancing her care responsibilities and the want to care for her mother alongside with her responsibilities and duty of care to her young children who at times were very much impacted by her mother's behaviour within the family home. In Nolene's experience, Nolene is a carer to her daughter with autism. So she talked about she would beat down the door. She's broken the door about 3 or 4 times. And when she can't get at me, she will break everything. And she has done it, break everything that you can see in the house. She's broken televisions, computers, laptops, and she break things belonging to herself. She's broken her Nintendo Switch 3 or 4 times, cups, plates, standing on them with no shoes. So I'd end up having to bring her to accident and emergency. And again, what came through very strongly in the findings was kind of the secondary harmful impacts from this in terms of the huge financial impact on family carers in terms of making repairs and quite significant, repairs to replacing items in the family home or destruction to the family home. And again, really having, that being a repeated occurrence and that being very, very challenging from a financial point of view. I think important to mention, and again, this came up more with the professionals than with the family carers themselves, the huge and a hugely negative impact of COVID-19 on their caregiver experiences. So one of the Family Carers Ireland focus group participants talked about, I think it really started to come up as a topic of concern in and around COVID when a lot of the day centres were closed. So what prompted a lot of these behaviours that started to concern the caregivers was the lack of supports that were in the community. And like in the heart of COVID, where families were locked up together 24/7. Patterns were broken, there wasn't consistency or scheduling, and all those things that started exploding, were escalating the number of issues where family carers were saying, I don't feel safe in my home. Their child with autism, or whether that was a parent with dementia, it was across the spectrum where they had external supports previously in place, and it started to really escalate to points of violence in some cases. Again, from the findings, it became very evident that for some family caregivers, these supports were never reinstated to the same level as they had been pre-COVID. And again, the significant knock-on impact this had on caregiving relationships and on the physical and mental well-being of the family carers. Okay, so the next key theme is in relation to expectations, responses, and systems that harm. And again, for many of our family carers, but also some professionals, this was kind of a secondary type of harm, but also equally damaging in terms of its impact on them. So again, participants globally reported the challenges of navigating a fragmented and very complicated health and social care system here in Ireland. I think of note is that diagnosis and early intervention was very much seen as a critical juncture. So the importance of both people living with dementia, but also for the autistic children or teenagers to get a diagnosis at a very, very early stage was deemed to have been absolutely critical, but something that didn't happen routinely, and people experienced significant delays in getting that diagnosis. Again, those missed opportunities for early intervention were very much felt to have, I suppose, to exacerbate the situation in many kind of situations. I think added to that, which is kind of the obvious pieces, even with diagnosis and early intervention, without the necessary tailored individualized supports, that really often family carers were trying to, I suppose, function in a very, very impossible, difficult situation. Again, professionals spoke widely about the unrealistic and unhelpful societal expectations and pressures which were placed on family carers, which they very much considered to be a contributory factor in the harm that people experienced. So again, kind of a recognition both from professionals and from family carers that the whole family would provide the necessary care, whether that, and often that included other children in the family, acting as caregivers. So in other words, young carers. Again, I think what was particularly striking for the autistic cohort was the lack of clarity as to who is responsible for providing supports and services to autistic children and adults, which led to many falling between the services. For all our family carers, and again, it was heartbreaking at times to hear their experiences of constantly having to fight and beg for help in order to stay safe, even in life-threatening situations. That help was not readily available. But again, to kind of parallel to that, many professionals reflected on their immense feelings of helplessness and frustration and their inability to respond even in crisis situations, and very much recognised and highlighted the link between care harm and the absence of appropriate condition-specific responsive services. So a Family Care Ireland senior manager reflected around some of these unrealistic expectations. You know, this perception, as I said, that's just you're getting carers allowance, so you've signed your life away. And exactly what does it mean to be a family carer? And you know, and I think of the parents of children with additional needs are really good at vocalizing this. My child needs 24/7 care, but really it's amplifying those voices and kind of saying that, you know, nobody can do 24/7 care. And it's not that you're paid to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know. So again, that kind of acknowledgement of the hugely unrealistic expectations of family caregivers. And again, I suppose that unhelpful narrative around people receiving or in receipt of carers allowance that basically they've kind of signed their lives away and they should be providing 24/7 hour care, which is certainly not safe and not the situation they should feel in or being put under that pressure. Again, I think the next quote illustrates really well the difficulties the family carers face trying to navigate recurrent systems. And again, that this was particularly pertinent in relation to autism. So again, there's no proper tracking. We're really frustrated. We get this all the time. Oh, they've autism, that's great, but that doesn't mean they need disability. They're mild to moderate intellectual disability, so they need to go to primary care team. Primary carers say, no, that's social inclusion. You go to social inclusion, and then they go, no, that's primary care. If you look at the points they got for their ID, that is actually moderate, but we have people who have different scales of what's mild and moderate. So again, I suppose differing thresholds within different organizations, I suppose different definitions of I suppose different access criteria was really, really problematic for both professionals and family carers experiencing care harm. Again, I think what was very striking was the whole issue of systems that harm, and as I said, that secondary kind of harm and trauma that was caused when carers tried to seek out help and get additional supports. So I think the quote from Paula and Sean is very powerful in terms of, you know, reflecting on the disability officer was in the HSE. She's charged with getting families like ours something if it's just gone like complete rock bottom and the family can't cope. And we were told as well, which was not helpful, you're not the worst case. There's a lot worse than you out there. And again, this was very much mirrored in other family carers reports in terms of being made to feel undeserving, unworthy, and really that there was a hierarchy of need in some ways and that they weren't deserving of getting the help and support that they needed. Again, aligned with that, you know, family carers from both the family carers of children or adults with autism and dementia spoke about the extremely unhelpful responses that they were often faced with. So, and again, I think Mairead, who's a dementia carer's experience speaks very strongly to that. So there was an incident where a carer, so this was a formal carer going into Mairead's family home to care for her mother. So it was just the two carers in the room at that time. So, obviously we weren't there to see what happened, whether it was him, sorry, it was Mairead's father, leave me alone, or whether it was a full-blown, lashing out to the person. She got injured, and then the day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I got a phone call from the director of the manager of services for older persons in the area, advising me that care had been withdrawn with immediate effect from my dad. So she advised that he had been a physical assault within the home, that the man needed a psychiatric assessment, and that it wasn't safe for her employees to be coming into the home, and that we could expect a call from the Gardaí in relation to the assault. And again, Mairead's situation was not an isolated incident. And I suppose for me, what was very striking was, I suppose, the double standards or the disconnect between the formal caregivers that had been sent into the family home to support Mairead in the care of her father, and what was expected or acceptable in terms of the harm that they experienced, versus the ongoing harm that Mairead and her other family members were experienced, where it was deemed to be fine that they would be harmed on a regular basis, but for the formal carers that wasn't okay, and in fact that behaviour was criminalised. Again, unsurprisingly, the impact on family carers themselves. So as a Family Carer Ireland focus group participant reflected, that sense of guilt and that sense of failure, that sense of, all those pieces. So I think the emotional toll is probably the more difficult than the physical toll that's happening when we come to care harm. That's physiological or psychological. Again, like my colleagues have been saying, fear to go out of the home, fear of shame, all those pieces really resonate. For me, probably, again, one of the most impactful findings from the study and concerning findings was the impact on siblings of the child or adult, mostly the child exhibiting harmful behaviour. And again, I think this quote kind of sums it up very well. So much is expected of carers. And I have to say, I really, really feel for the siblings, because there are so many siblings out there taking full responsibility. I was only talking to a lady last week, and that has a child with quite complex needs and siblings who are very close in age. And her own situation as a single mother, those siblings are taking the responsibility to the point that they're missing days of college because they have to be with their brother. And it's just wrong on so many levels. To have children looking after children is so wrong. And again, I think particularly for the carers of children or adults with autism, that impact on siblings was very, very pronounced. And we'll look at that a little bit more over the next few slides. Okay, so Nolene talked about, I suppose, the safeguards she tried to put in place to protect the other children in her family. So I had shown P, or my younger child aged 8, a safe plan and a safety plan, because this happens so many times. I used to say to P, it does not matter what happens to Mammy. Your job is to open the front door, whether it's through the sitting room window or the front door or the back door. So we used to go through this all the time and go into the neighbours next door, and you get her to ring the guards. So again, in Nolene's case, that, having to engage with an 8-year-old child around the safety plan to try and keep her, but also her child, her younger child, safe within this context was very, very difficult, and certainly not something that you'd imagine an 8-year-old should or could be trying to deal with. And again, we can only imagine the kind of longer term impacts for those siblings in terms of witnessing this harmful behaviour, but also often being the target of it. Again, I think Lana's quotes is one of the more very distressing, but I think again speaks very strongly to the real reality for many of our family carers in these often life-threatening situations. So Lana spoke about when Dee was about 9 years of age, I was home on my own. My husband was in work and Dee came back from school, and Dee had a tremendous meltdown, and he pulled my hair, even though he doesn't usually do that, but that day he did. He was only 8 or 9, and he pulled me with such force that he pulled me to the ground, and I hit my head in the ground, and I was there for a few seconds. And then my eldest child came from school. So imagine, Dee was 9, so my eldest was 11. Can you imagine what it's like for an 11-year-old child to restrain his brother on the sofa to give me that chance to get up? I remember this to the day I die. Like, my eldest was crying. He was saying, Mommy, I don't know how much longer I can restrain him for. So again, we can only imagine the huge traumatic impact that had on Anna, but also on her other child, and just the difficulties of trying to, as I said, manage that type of harmful behaviour on an ongoing basis. And again, we'll move on to often the responses from services were unhelpful and unwelcome in many of these contexts. I think also, the whole impact on the whole family unit was very much there in the findings as well. And again, I think that this quote kind of sums it up very nicely in terms of, the autism focus group participant reflected on those children grow into adults, but like we've no legislation, nothing to support us. And I suppose they remain at home, the situation gets worse. And then as X said, we are then putting in safeguarding against the family because they are trying to protect themselves. And by protecting themselves, I'm saying I have to put in a safeguarding report against you. And we're a disability service, but we've no foster placements, no respite, we have nowhere for that person to go. And it's just for us, it's frustrating. And for the family members, it's just exhausting. It's just and then they get angry with us because we are where is this residential place? We have nothing to offer you. It's heartbreaking when you see the impact, as you said, it has on the children and the family, the adults in the family, but also the family relationships. So again, that kind of huge impact on kind of the family as a unit and how they function, and their well-being and their safety was definitely very evident from participants' accounts. I think equally distressing as the harm that people experienced was the responses that were kind of offered to them in these very, very difficult situations. So Nolene spoke about her own experience with her child and reflected the poor guards, they know see inside out. And they've even said to me, it's so unfair that you've no other choice but to ring us. That is what is on the TUSLA website and their little card. In the case of emergency, you ring the guards. And as they say, they are not professionals to be able to do anything for C. They can only calm down the situation, i.e. the guards. It's the superintendent that makes the decision on section 12, and he doesn't take that lightly. I ended up in accident and emergency with bruises and damages, 4 broken ribs, and C was taken in by the guards on the section 12. This is how C ended up in voluntary care. It was horrendous. So again, for many family carers, the responses were neither welcome nor deemed helpful. And again, for many of the professionals, this was also the case. Again, I think this quote from a Family Carer Ireland project manager, again, illustrates for a person living with dementia, some of those kind of unhelpful responses or responses that harm. So you may have a parent who's living with dementia, another adult child as their sole carer, respite is being offered and the person with dementia will not accept anybody into the house, but the care is completely burnt out. They cannot continue to give care, and yet the person with dementia is unable to recognise that. People who have a very difficult relationship with their parents, perhaps there's some trauma in the past or some abuse, the parent then develops dementia and they come back into that relationship to care. And the carer is then in a very vulnerable position. And if they're stepping back, particularly if that parent had abused them in the past, whether that be physical or psychological or emotional, and it creates a very, very challenging dynamic for the care. So again, I think that gives us some very useful insights into some of the complexities of these situations. Again, for me, it was quite surprising how helpless professionals felt. And really, as I said earlier, even in crisis situations, not being able to access respite or any other concrete supports. And actually what happened more often than not, particularly for carers of children or adults with autism, is often the response would be, rather than remove the child who was displaying harmful behaviours, that the suggested solution or intervention will be to remove the other children in the house who were not displaying harmful behaviours, because a foster placement or alternative care arrangement just could not be identified for the child causing harmful behaviour. But in terms of this quote, again, I think it's very useful in terms of that insight and the professional position. So we see it from all ends. The guards or the police ring us. Sometimes we have the guards close to tears saying, what am I supposed to do? In extreme cases, we will do a call and we will say you have to bring them to the hospital, you have to Section 12 them and bring them to hospital because we don't have a placement for them. But again, we can think about the awful, I suppose, awfulness of having to present to accident and emergency, knowing the state of our healthcare, having to sit that out, trying to, having that as a place of safety for a child, who is obviously in distress, exhibiting responsive behaviours, and really that being a completely inappropriate environment and response for everybody concerned, but really there being no other options in this situation. Okay, so look, I suppose this was really just, I suppose, a whistle-stop tour and insight into some of the key findings. It does not go into them in a huge amount of detail. And again, I'd really encourage you to have a good read of the full research report because it gives much more depth and insight into some of those issues. And again, I suppose I'm very aware of kind of just skimmed over the diagnosis and early intervention piece in particular. But I suppose we want to also look at and pay attention to what helps and what else can we do to support family carers and professionals in these situations. So again, the next few slides are really a combination of data from the interviews and the focus groups, but also our Word Cafe event, which essentially is where we brought together, as I said, family carers, professionals and advocacy organisations to really brainstorm and tease out and co-design our information and awareness raising materials and also our best practice considerations. So really we ask participants to look at what terminology should we use to define the concept of carer harm or carer hurt, because as I said from the outset, we really, and we still are kind of struggling with that piece. How can we make the issue of carer harm more visible, and what information could it be helpful for family carers to have? And then finally, how can professionals and service providers best support family carers experiencing carer harm? What strategies or interventions might be helpful? Okay, so in terms of what helps, I mean, first and foremostly, advocacy, sorry, skip the slide there. Okay, I'll try and go back. No, I'm going forward. Right. Okay, back again. So in terms of advocacy, really recognizing that advocacy was critically important to all participants. And within that context, really acknowledging the family carers of different types of resources, such as skills, time, education, and finances. And this will very much influence the scope and effectiveness of their advocacy. Therefore, family carers felt it would be very helpful if they had access to practical representation and professional advocacy support from organisations such as Family Carers Ireland, the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, as I am when attending meetings with educators, the HSE, disability managers, or indeed other service providers. But also in terms of advocacy, assistance with identifying power holders who can deliver on what the family carer or autistic person or person living with dementia needs. So things as simple as the name and contact details of the person they need to contact in relation to specific issues, as I said, whether that's the disability manager, manager services for older persons, or the local politicians. Again, something I didn't highlight, which I should have, for many of our family carers who participated in the study, they did have to, as a last resort to going to the media, resort to going to politicians to try and get the help and support they needed. And even at these strenuous efforts, often that help still didn't happen. But in terms of the advocacy piece, also getting help with letter writing or emails to key stakeholders or support with social media and interviews when engaging with the media around their particular issue and case. Again, the whole issue and the need for routine and proactive assessment of family carers' support needs, their coping capacity and impact of caregiving on their physical and mental health. Aligned with that, again, not only the need for early diagnosis and early intervention, but also that need, a very, very urgent need to introduce legislation to ensure recommendations of assessments of need are resourced and implemented. So currently children have a statutory right to an assessment of need if their parents or guardians believe them to have a disability under the Disability Act 2005. However, currently the state is not obliged to provide supports to meet the needs identified. Similarly, people living with dementia have no legal right currently to an assessment of need or provision of home care supports. So while they have a legislative entitlement to nursing home care, that same legislative right does not exist in relation to home care. And again, some suggestions about the need to change our current funding model so it's linked more to rights-based care provision. In terms of collaboration, that kind of real need to build links at the community level and to signpost to enable resources to be pooled and to avoid duplication, including the setting up of clear referral pathways and services. Again, there was kind of acknowledgement that some utilisation of community-based expertise, such as the Gardaí, and again, the community Gardaí were very, very much identified as, while they were kind of put in a position where they felt that they couldn't help in these situations, but actually family caregivers feeling that their intervention was helpful in terms of support. Again, for family carers of people with autism and the professionals, for some, they felt that the MEHL process, which is operated by TUSLA, could be helpful in terms of that wraparound whole family approach. Again, the whole need, unsurprisingly, of education and training, so that provision of information and knowledge in the presenting disability or condition is essential. And again, the need for that information very early. So, example, for people living with dementia, that they're getting their dementia diagnosis at the earliest possible stage, because again, this empowers family carers to, to have information about the specific type of dementia, the types of behaviours to expect, and really for them to be able to, I suppose, take on the caregiving responsibilities with that kind of knowledge and education and training. Again, participants felt the need to establish peer support groups for family carers and communities was seen as hugely beneficial in providing a safe space to share concerns around experiences of care harm. Because again, participants talked a lot about kind of feeling very isolated in this kind of situation, and often it was only by kind of accidental meeting of another family caregiver or kind of a conversation at an event that actually people started to make connections with other people, family carers in similar situations. Again, the whole need for timely, individualized, tailored, condition-specific services was critical. And again, I think the whole issue of respite was absolutely, very, very striking, and not something that's new to any of us. But again, I think the study very much re-emphasised that, for people living with dementia, the whole challenge in terms of, I suppose, especially as we move into our assisted decision making and we're now live, how do we navigate these situations where a family caregiver is in harm, is burnt out, cannot care safely, but the person living with dementia doesn't want to go to respite. So again, suggesting that we need more in-home respite, again, for children with autism. I suppose the respite facilities and the support they need often just simply are not there, or many family carers talked about, being guaranteed respite and then not being pulled at the last minute because there wasn't staffing in the facility. So again, and for many family carers feeling that if they had more regular respite, they may well have been able to continue to care for the person they were caring for a longer period of time. It kind of gives them that break, that time for themselves, and also for the family unit, but that often that just wasn't available or couldn't be accessed. So as I said, specific services identified as crucial for people living with dementia. As I said, the provision of in-home respite and social care support workers was really, and this time to task, I suppose, continual changeover of different carers really being recognised as not helpful in terms of being disorientating to the person living with dementia, often upsetting and unsettling them. Aligned with that, the need for referral to the HSE mental health services for older persons in a timely manner when the person living with dementia begins to exhibit any types of agitation or aggression. And again, many of the dementia carers talked about, that pathway to diagnosis was also not always timely or seamless in the way that it might be. For autistic children, again, that need for increased provision of early intervention, but also school places, like that was and again, we've seen that in the media in very recent times, that whole challenge of getting appropriate school places to that particular child. Again, there was some suggestion that the utilisation of the National Treatment Purchase Fund for the purchase of essential community services such as behavioural therapy, speech and language therapy and occupational therapy were something that should be considered. I think, again, and very importantly, the whole recognition around the need for the provision of family therapy, which focuses, I suppose, takes a holistic approach, focusing on the whole family unit, which will allow each family member to voice their worries, concerns and wishes, what was deemed to be potentially very, very helpful. But again, also within that, to make available individualised counselling. So to help family carers work on boundaries in terms of their own well-being and what they can reasonably expect of themselves and how to hold boundaries in terms of others' expectations, as this will help them to manage their feelings of stigma, shame, guilt, stress and burnout. So again, some kind of quite practical suggestions in relation to what could and might help. There is, I suppose, ultimately, our the culmination of this project was the production of five outputs, and you can see them there. And again, it took quite a lot of effort to get these over the line within the timescales of the project. But again, I think really important that we have developed and made available. And again, these are available on the Family Carers Ireland website, but also the UCD research repository. And we'll share links to all of the outputs in the slides after today's event. But essentially what we've done is develop a generic information leaflet on, are you experiencing care harm, which very much, I suppose, walks family carers through what is care harm, what this might look like, but also signposting to services and supports. We also developed a dementia-specific leaflet and an autism-specific leaflet, as well as best practice considerations for professionals and obviously the research report. And again, we hope that this will go some way towards, I suppose, demystifying this and raising awareness around the whole issue of care harm going forward. And again, we'd really encourage you to use these, to share these, and we hope that they will help a little bit with things. Okay, so moving into discussion, study limitations and conclusions. We're nearly there. So in terms of kind of final reflections and discussion, ultimately, I suppose a diagnosis of autism or dementia did not automatically bring with it the services for the child or adult being cared for, or indeed the necessary supports for the family caregiver, even when family members and children within the family were experiencing significant harm. Staffing and resourcing pressures, however, resulted in many services and organisational systems taking what we might call a silo mentality, imposing strict diagnostic categories for access. So meanwhile, families live with the risk of harm as the child or adult exhibiting the harmful behaviour is not getting any professional input, and the family carers are not being supported to, I suppose, to manage the situation they find themselves in. Again, I think there was a failure in many, many instances to acknowledge and address the family carers, siblings or other family members' right to live in a safe environment. And again, I think going forward, we all really need to, I suppose, stop compartmentalizing who our primary service user is. We really need to look at our families in a holistic way and look at the impact on the whole family unit. Again, we know from previous work, and again, Declan Coogan in University of Galway has done some really nice work around this in terms of child-parent violence. So many parents who are assaulted by their children may deny or minimise it, or indeed blame themselves for the children's behaviour. Parents often fear blame from professionals who, again, can either minimise or excuse the child's harmful behaviour. And I think for me, I do really feel for professionals in this as well, because for many, conflicts very much existed for them in relation to balancing the needs, safety and protection of all family members. So the outcome of mandatory reporting concerning safeguarding of children and mandatory referrals in relation to those who might be defined as vulnerable adults resulted in paperwork and stress for parents and carers, but often little meaningful action to protect or provide vital services and supports which would help to reduce or eliminate risk and the harm being experienced. And again, some of our family carers spoke very, very, very powerfully about situations where actually these harmful behaviours were criminalised, and really for both family carers and professionals involved, that was not something that was wanted nor welcomed. But within our current, I suppose, lack of services and in the current policy framework, that often was the only route that could be taken. Okay. Again, I suppose ultimately, there was a strong consensus that we need to revisit the terminology of care harm and consider alternatives. So some of the suggestions, particularly from the World Cafe, were phrases such as carers who have experienced harm or carers who have experienced harmful behaviours. Again, we know from previous studies that parents or carers can feel immense shame and isolation, which often prevents them from seeking support in a timely way. As I said earlier, that lack of a legislative underpinning for the resourcing of disability assessments, a statutory entitlement to home care, and family carers' right to standardised assessment of need in the Irish context is of significant ongoing concern. Again, effective safety, protection, and safeguarding needs to do more than simply wait for a situation to reach a crisis point. And as this study has shown, even when it reaches crisis point, often there still isn't an appropriate or helpful intervention available or provided. I think for me, some of it comes back to, as I said, the need for further legislation, but also for me, that significant gap that we still have in the Irish context around legislation and it potentially having the potential to empower the agency of professionals. So, as you may be aware, we don't have any primary adult safeguarding legislation at the moment. So something like a duty to provide assistance within that context would enable professionals to put services in place, particularly where carers are struggling and under threat. And again, within, I think we've a really good example of that in the English context in terms of their Care Act 2014, where there's a legislative underpinning both to carers having an entitlement to an assessment of their need, but also a legislative entitlement to the needs of that assessment being fulfilled or met in terms of service provision and support. I think ultimately for me, participants' experiences also suggest that we need to consider the more sophisticated concept of human interdependence, which Toronto has written widely about, but also that interdependent nature of everyday living and caregiving when dealing with care or harm. Okay, so study limitations, and there are many, but that's not to, I suppose, undermine the huge usefulness of the study. So ultimately, as Nikki said at the start, this is a small-scale exploratory study that is used a purposeful sampling approach, which is obviously non-representative and can't be extrapolated to the wider population of family caregivers. As I mentioned previously, recruiting family carers who had experienced care harm was challenging, and this was very much reflected in our small sample size. The findings are certainly not generalisable to the practices and responses of all professionals and organisations in this field who are dealing with cases of care harm. And for me, a significant limitation was I wouldn't say non-participation, but we weren't able to have the Gardaí involved as participants despite strenuous efforts around this. And again, that's something, I would like to maybe revisit or to engage with the Gardaí, because they definitely, came through so strongly about what a critical, important role they have. And again, I think going forward, I would very much encourage our community-based teams to, I suppose, harness the Gardaí and involve them in some of these processes, whether that's case conferences or kind of care planning conferences, in terms of looking at, how everybody can work better together in these contexts. Again, obviously, another limitation is that the findings relate to the Irish context, where there may be, and I would say there definitely are, cultural nuances around our structural and systemic issues, which are significantly different to other jurisdictions. Again, I think looking forward, it would be beneficial if future work explored the views and experiences of a greater number of family carers and professionals, and such work could really help to trace the shared and divergent experiences of family carers and professionals from an international perspective, and really, I suppose, develop our understanding a little bit more around that. So in terms of conclusions, care harm remains poorly understood and a taboo topic with uncertain and inconsistent responses from professionals and services. However, as our understanding develops, the hope that we can support family carers and the people they care for effectively and non-judgmentally grows. However, continuing shame and fear of being blamed means that family carers may not come forward for help until the situation is a crisis point, and indeed they may not identify the problem as harmful or abusive themselves until this point, particularly where a child or adult's disability appears to be the significant cause. Finally, those who take on significant caring responsibilities and who experience care harm should have certainty that the necessary services and supports will be provided in a proactive, preventative manner, and that services will be in place to help them maintain their own health and well-being, as well as that of their family unit. So in terms of acknowledgements, I would like to particularly thank Nikki for her ongoing help, guidance and support, as well as to all the Family Care Ireland staff who provided huge amount of assistance with recruitment and who participated in the study. A special thanks must be extended to Sue O'Grady and Joanne Murphy from Family Carers Ireland for their help with the preparation of the research report. I would also like to sincerely thank the many individuals who provided feedback on the draft booklets, and in particular the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland Dementia Care Campaign Network members. I'd also like to thank our steering group members for their invaluable support and expertise. And finally, and most importantly, we would like to sincerely thank and formally acknowledge all of the family carers and professionals who participated in the study. Their participation has helped us to better understand what it's like to experience care harm and the challenges related to supporting family carers who are being harmed. So other than that, just would like to thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.